Hey everyone, welcome back to Cinema 3. I'm Bridget.
I'm Kyle.
I'm Tagore.
So, for episode 6, we decided to talk about Incredibles 2. Set immediately after the events of the first movie, Incredibles 2 follows the Parr family attempting to rebuild their lives after Syndrome's jet destroys their home. So when Helen, aka Elastigirl, is given an offer she can't resist, she dons her mask and suit once again to try and build up public support for supers, while Bob, aka Mr. Incredible, stays at home to look after Violet, who has boy problems, Dash, who has maths problems, and Jack, who has recently acquired superpowers. So, now I'm going to pass it over to Kyle to talk about our Patreon.
If you like what we do here on the podcast, then consider checking out and donating to the Cinema 3 Patreon. For $2 a month, you can get your name featured in the credits of our episodes, early access to normal episodes, plus you get bonus access to Patreon exclusive episodes. Obviously, you don't have to pledge on Patreon, but it would really help us out in getting the podcast off the ground and let us continue to do the podcast for work.
So, next up is, would everyone recommend this movie? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes, ultimately, I would recommend Incredibles 2. It's a good movie, and I reckon most people will like it.
I agree, I think that most people would like it. It's got a little bit of something for everyone. Fun for the whole family. Bring your kids, $12
No, don't bring
pop.
your kids, because the audience is full with like 18
It's already
to 20-year-olds.
full enough of kids, Bridget.
Yes.
It doesn't need any more kids.
Doesn't need more kids.
Oh my god, alright, I get it. Everyone hates children.
We just have to say it right off the bat, really. The animation in this film is stunning. It's amazingly good.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. The animation in this one is awesome, and I'm really glad that they kept it looking as good as the first one did.
Oh, it looks better than the first
It's
one.
much
though,
better. I watched a comparison of the first scene, and you're like, oh my god, so much has changed since the first film.
The animation was really slick, and I really enjoyed just how fluid everything felt, and it looks so good. Like, we've gotten to the point now where it's obvious like they are able to create photorealistic imagery, but they don't because that's the style. The style comes before and it adds to the charm and everything.
Yeah, that's true. You don't feel like they've been restricted by their technology. To that point, actually, the animation, especially in the action scenes, is awesome. And the bike scene, I loved the bike scene so much. As soon as that bike parted in two, I was like, yes, I am here for it.
I reckon all of Elastigirl's scenes are the best though. Like, she has the best scenes in the entire movie.
Yeah, it was cool to see like the Incredibles versus the other superheroes. Like, Void was really cool.
Yes, I really liked Void. I thought she was really cool. Like, all those other superheroes that they had individually, who really cares? I don't think we were meant to care about them. But when they were fighting together as a group and all of the powers were interacting, that is the stuff I love to see.
Violet versing Void was the best.
Yeah, and when like Void uses her portals to make Elastigirl punch herself in the face and things like that. And when Violet traps that electric guy's electricity in a force field.
I liked how everyone's powers combined together and made for like some really entertaining action scenes where they're all chaining their powers together and everything, and it's fun, and it also like feels fresh. Even in this age of superhero movies where there's so many of them coming out, this one still manages to feel fresh and still have that sense of fun that even the first film had when the whole comic book boom hadn't really kicked off yet.
I noticed that they focused more on the females in the Incredibles 2, because the first one was Mr. Incredible and his event on the island, and then it had cool scenes like Dash running from the bad dudes across the jungle. And then in this one, you've got literally the opposite. You've got Elastigirl. The whole movie is like centered around her, and there's way more of Violet in this one, and not as much as Dash.
Yeah, there is too. That's true.
There is. Looking back on that, I see what you mean.
Like, Violet had almost nothing in the first film.
Yeah, it's crazy because I actually watched that the other week and she's not in it much, and neither's Dash.
And then in the second one, she was like an entire subplot, which was good.
Also to that point, you've got in the first movie a male villain with Syndrome, and then in the second movie you've got a female villain with Evelyn Dever. And so I guess that kind of does reflect how the second one is a lot more female focused, with more from Elastigirl and Violet, and then also Evelyn.
I feel like my main thoughts on this movie are like, when you compare the two movies, they are different, but that's not necessarily a bad thing because the movie is still good. It's still a fun, entertaining movie.
And it still ties enough to the first one and continues from the first one enough that it doesn't feel like a completely new, entirely separate part. Like, they're definitely connected. But it's still different enough that you can tell that it's a sequel and you can differentiate the two from each other and know when the first one ends and the second one begins. So, I think that's good.
I feel like maybe it didn't have to be set directly after the first film. I think they took a right approach by starting it with the Underminer battle, but then I think they could have waited like a year or so in the timeline and then had another adventure.
Generally, I liked the story in this one. I feel like it worked well jumping off from the events of the first film and sort of going into more of this campaign for superheroes to bring them into the spotlight again and change the lore. I feel like compared to other Pixar sequels, not going to name any names, Cars 2, this one feels like it actually has something to say, even 14 years later from the original. It feels like it's got a message. I even feel like it has a bit too much to say, to where like the multiple subplots end up not ruining the film, but just sort of making it a bit more stuffed, if that makes any sense. Like the film feels overstuffed with things in it happening.
Yeah, I was also thinking that in Incredibles 2, the plot is definitely up to a lot more, because in the first one, the plot is definitely a lot more streamlined. Like, there's a very clear idea of who everyone is, what they want, why things are happening, whereas in Incredibles 2, first of all, you've got a whole new batch of people that are introduced on top of the people that you already know. Then even with that, there's a lot more that's going on with each of the characters, and because you're constantly switching from what Elastigirl's up to when Bob is with the kids, there are just a lot of characters to account for, and they were definitely trying to do a lot. I don't know if they fully clarified what their message was in the end. I'm still not sure if it came across what they were trying to say, like if there was a moral thing we were meant to take away, other than be a good person, which is pretty standard, I guess.
Personally, I just liked the whole message of Evelyn's character, the villain, the antagonist, Screenslaver, and her whole motivation. I've heard people talk about this movie and specifically the villain in it and say that she's weak, or that there's a villain problem in Incredibles 2. Personally, I don't feel that way.
Yeah, neither do I.
I feel like the villain in this one was much stronger than the original, because watching the first Incredibles again, Syndrome's only in it for like 4 or 5 scenes in the movie, and he doesn't get nearly as much development as well.
That being said, though Syndrome has significantly less scenes, we do know kind of who he is from the get-go. Like, we understand that fanboy character, and we get that the message is don't meet your idols, pretty much. Even looking back at the first movie, if you look at Syndrome's motive, his whole thing was that he wanted to give everyone powers so that everyone was powerful and therefore no one was special. That's kind of a weak motivation, and I think it would make a lot more sense if he just wanted to personally get revenge on Mr. Incredible for ruining his childhood dreams.
I think it was that though, wasn't it? He was getting revenge by destroying that idea that he's special.
I guess, but then at the same time, he wanted to make himself the hero by fighting off the Omnibot. So it was sort of like, do you want to be super or do you want everyone to be super? Pretty much what I'm trying to say is that if you really pick into Syndrome's motivation, it's kind of weak past personal revenge. Whereas if you look at Evelyn's, it does make sense. It's pretty clear why she's doing what she's doing. And on top of that, it directly relates to her backstory. So that actually makes me think that Evelyn's motivations are a bit stronger in a way. It's more complex, but I think it's stronger.
Her motivation is strong, but I feel like the twist towards the end where it's like, oh, she's the villain, because they hide the identity of the Screenslaver for quite a while and then they reveal it's her, but I knew it was her. Like, as soon as they showed her on screen, I was like, it's her. And I don't know, she just looks like a villain. She does. Yeah. Like, I called it right away. It wasn't surprising when it happened.
The thing we've got to remember is, although it may be frustrating to feel like we're a bit ahead of the characters, this is still a children's movie, and I'm sure that it stumped a lot of children, myself included, to be completely honest, up until like a scene before the reveal, probably. But like, I don't think it needed to be a big twist because we're not really the target market.
I don't know. I reckon Pixar these days, like, they've made themselves known to not only just appeal to kids, but appeal to adults, and I feel like if you're gonna make a film, I'm not just gonna look the other way when you have a twist, but it's not at all surprising. It should be surprising for kids who watch it for the first time, but also for adults who watch it for the first time.
I guess, but it still does have to make sense and be really clear for the kids as well. And I think it was a good enough of a twist. And I also don't think a lot of people guessed as early as soon as she walked on screen for the first time.
Okay, maybe
so you may be ahead of of a few
Maybe
people in
other
that
people-
respect. But I honestly thought it was going to be the brother for the first time, and then I realized I was like, oh no.
No, I was like, the
sister.
brother A is too obvious, and also he seems like he actually wanted to help.
Yeah, he seemed too genuine. But then I was like, well, hey, he could just be a really good actor. Who knows?
And then as soon as they introduced a sibling, I'm like, oh, it's her.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think all kids or most people in general are going to make that connection. So I guess you're probably just ahead of the pack in this respect.
Oh, thanks, Bridget.
No, that's all right.
Don't worry, I'm with you, Kyle. I saw it coming a mile away.
Okay, cool. Guess I'm just stupid.
My issue with Evelyn being the villain, it wasn't that she turned out to be the villain, although that was pretty cheap and cliche. But if the screenslaver villain was just the screenslaver character, that would have been a much cooler enemy, not just Evelyn. Because I was talking to my family about this. In the first Incredibles film, the ending was, oh, the whole family's versing this giant ass robot. They're destroying up the city. It's so cool. Frozone's there. They're running on water. They're doing super catch. They're doing all this stuff. In this one, it was Elastigirl struggling for oxygen on a plane.
Yes.
I was like, yeah! No, I was actually the opposite of that. But I was like, where's that grand scale of the whole family fighting together to defeat the villain? And I was like, oh, it can't work because the villain is just a human character. It's not like someone with actual powers. And when you guys were talking about the motivation, I remember her motivation was like, oh, well, my grandparents, someone broke into the house and
I think it was her parents.
Her parents.
Was it her parents?
And
Yeah.
my dad, he called for the superhero and no one answered, and then they got shot. All superheroes are bad, now I'm gonna do a legal. I was like, bad motivation.
I don't know. I really liked just her and her brother's characters and like how they were based.
I liked their characters,
when you look at-
but I didn't like the motivation. Like I liked their two different dynamics. You know, they felt like a genuine brother and sister.
I kind of disagree. I feel like the motivations were strong because Evelyn and her brother Winston, they are basically two sides of the same coin.
That's exactly what I was just about to say.
And it sort of creates this grey situation.
Like, there isn't really a right or wrong response, I guess.
Yeah, there isn't a right or wrong answer to this question. Like, both of them are right, but I just liked how, you know, the brother, Winston, he takes the side of, oh, because superheroes were illegal, that's why they weren't able to come and save his dad when he needed them. Whereas the sister takes the angle of saying, why didn't he just use his safe room like he should have? Why did he rely on these altruistic beings to save him when he could have saved himself? Like, that was cool to me, and I feel like that's something that doesn't feel like it belongs in a kid's movie, but it's also because it's so complex, you know, and I feel like that's like the only real adult or mature sort of thing that's within this movie.
I liked the dynamic, but I just didn't like how that transitioned into her motivation being all superheroes are bad.
I think she's more saying, like, we shouldn't give them all of our trust and
Yeah.
the power to do whatever they want, essentially.
Not just trust, like, we shouldn't rely on them to sort our own problems. Like, her argument is that they've made us weak because, you know, we see these superheroes and it's like, oh great. And then she relates that back to technology where it's like, you know, we rely on technology every day.
Oh, I didn't catch that message.
I just want to quickly talk about another point I had. I just think that looking back at this movie, and I know we keep comparing it to the first Incredibles quite a bit, but I don't think that's without good reason, just because, you know, they do feel very different, and I just kind of want to elaborate more on that. As a sequel to the original film that came out 14 years ago, I'd say that this sequel feels very different. I mean, it's still a film about this endearing superhero family, but it definitely plays up the comedy compared to the first one, especially the slapstick. You know, there's
Prime example is Jack Jack.
yeah, basically any scenes featuring Jack Jack. It's like that Jack Jack animated short that they had, but like the whole movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty accurate description.
Yeah, I don't know. After watching the first movie again, I just realized how mature that film is.
Yeah.
You know, like
yeah.
this film has like one or two brief moments of looking at that maturity.
Yeah.
But you know, the first film, it's a Pixar animated film that's marketed for kids, but it's dark and it feels a lot more mature than other Pixar movies, like say Cars 2.
Yeah. And I do think mature is the right word as well, because the amount of slapstick comedy in this does sort of decrease its overall maturity. And if that's something you liked about the first one, then that can be disappointing.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first film, it has scenes and elements in it where it's just like, this doesn't feel like it belongs in a kid's movie. I love it because it just makes it so much more enjoyable as you get older because it doesn't age. It's still as great as you remember, and it's still good for when you're watching it as a kid and when you're watching it as an adult adult. You know, like the first Incredibles has scenes such as when Mr. Incredible saves someone who's trying to commit suicide.
Yeah, that's
You
probably
know?
one of the darker moments.
Like,
Hmm.
you know, like when I was a kid, I was so confused. Well, I couldn't comprehend why anyone would jump off a building. You
voluntarily.
know, like it didn't occur to me. And scenes even with just the Parr family that feel like they're out of like a family drama, not like an animated kids movie. You know, you look at Incredibles 2, and it's quite clear that darker and mature edge the first movie had was pretty much dropped. There's a real sense of threat and consequences of failure that feel very real in the first film, which you can't really say about the second film. And I think that's one of the larger criticisms I can make when talking about Incredibles 2, because I remember watching as a kid, watching the first Incredibles movie and feeling that sense of threat of Syndrome's henchmen when they're hunting down Violet and Dash, you
Yeah,
know?
definitely.
They have those scenes like Helen in the cave saying, you know, these guys aren't like Saturday morning cartoons, like they will kill you. Like they don't care
They
that
don't
if you
care that you're children.
they don't care if you're children, you know, they will kill you. And it's like, Jesus, that's terrifying.
Yeah, the first one was like a whole lot dark if you think about it. Even thinking back, it's like Syndrome would kill Mr. Incredible's entire family with the missile.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah,
you're like,
exactly.
Oh
Yeah,
my
that whole
God.
that scene where Elastigirl and kids are on the plane and he's sending the missile, and that brief moment when Mr. Incredible believes his family is
thinks that-
dead.
Yeah.
And he like
Yeah,
strangles Mirage, and it's like, Jesus, you know, like that film has guts. It felt a lot more grounded, I'd say. Going back to the slapstick comedy aspect, yeah, I feel like most of the film feels like a slapstick comedy compared to the tone of the first movie. It's made up of scenes like, for example, the scenes with Jack and the raccoon. You know, for every scene with Elastigirl that sort of moves the plot forward, there's a funny scene where Bob's looking after the kids, which felt to me at least that those scenes were primarily there for comedy.
Comedic relief and laughs. Yeah. They definitely did get a reaction though every time. So I guess they got what they were going for.
I still don't think any of that makes the movie bad, because yeah, like you said, the comedy works and it's entertaining and it's still a fun time overall, and it doesn't detract too much from anything to the point where it's like, this is pulling me out of it. Like I said before, I think it's just interesting to point out just how all these films are very different in tone.
Let's wrap this up then. So, Tagore, would you like to go first? Please give us your final thoughts and your score out of 5.
I enjoyed it. I mean, after I saw it, I was like, did I really wait 14 years for this? And then the next day I was like, yeah, I waited
Yes, I
14
did.
years for this. It was good. I guess it just took time to soak in, like, a few nitpicks here and there, you know, like the Underminer and the villain, but like, basically I was just glad to see The Incredibles again back in action. I would give this movie a 4 out of 5 Elastifix. So,
No.
that's what
No,
we're going
that's,
with.
That's,
That's what
We're
we're
not
going with.
accepting
Keep
that,
it
I'm
in.
sorry.
that's really bad.
Keep it in.
Your request has been declined by the
Oh,
council.
wow. Oh, I got it. 4 out of 5. Honey, wear my super suits. Is
Alright,
that
we'll
more
go with that.
acceptable?
I like that. That is more acceptable.
Monsieur Kyle, what did you think?
I think Incredibles 2 is a good time. It's a fun family film. I think it has something to say, which is important. I like the continuation of the story. I really did like the villain. And it was just, yeah, it was fun to see the Incredibles are back. And hopefully it's not 14 years before they make a third film. I heard that Brad Bird isn't ruling out a third film, so I'm looking forward to it. So all in all, I will be giving Incredibles 2 3.5 Honey, Where Are My Super Suits out of 5.
Very clean, very clean. A good rating system.
Basically, to sum it all up, I would say that the dynamics between the characters and the action scenes are my favorite parts, and just the animation in general is fantastic. I was gonna say incredible, but I stopped myself. I'm glad. If you liked the first movie, so if you're a human, then you will like the second. I think that's a pretty safe bet to make. I haven't spoken to anyone yet who's disliked it, and personally, I really, really liked it myself. So I would give Incredibles 2 4 Honey, Where's My Super Suits out of 5.
Done properly, parenting is a heroic act. Done properly.